My name is Ethan Cole, and I'm 28 years old. 3 weeks ago, I signed papers that took my parents' garage out of my brother's hands forever. At the reading of the will, my brother Marcus told me to sign the quitclaim he'd already prepared. He said it was just a formality, something to clean up the estate. I smiled. I nodded. Then I called the lawyer my grandfather had quietly hired for me 4 years earlier, a lawyer Marcus didn't know existed. The next morning, Marcus found out the garage wasn't his to sell. It never had been. He went pale. Then quiet. Then cold. Before I tell you what happened next, please hit like and subscribe. Drop your city and local time below. I love knowing where you're listening from. Now let me take you back to 8 years ago, when my grandfather said something I didn't understand until the day I stood in that garage, holding the one thing he left for me. My grandfather's garage smelled like motor oil and cedar shavings. Always. Even in winter, when the cold came through the gaps in the door, that smell stayed. Warm, familiar. He built furniture back there. Nothing fancy. Birdhouses, shelves, a rocking chair he never finished for my grandmother. I used to sit on an overturned bucket and watch him sand the same piece of wood for an hour, like time didn't matter to him at all. You rush wood, he told me once, running his thumb along a grain line, and it splits on you later. Looks fine for now. Doesn't hold. I was 12. I thought he meant furniture. My parents' house was different. Quiet in a way that wasn't peaceful. Quiet like holding your breath. My mother worked 2 jobs. My father wasn't around much after the divorce. So I spent my afternoons at my grandfather's, where the radio played static Y oldies and he'd hand me a glass of lemonade sweating in the August heat, ice cubes clinking against the glass. Marcus came around less. He was older, already chasing things. Money, attention, shortcuts. I remember him asking our grandfather once, casually, what the garage and the land under it were worth. Not what it meant. What it was worth. My grandfather didn't answer him directly. He just kept sanding. That was the first crack I noticed. Small. Easy to miss if you weren't watching closely. But I was always watching closely. By the time I was 16, I understood something was different about how Marcus looked at our grandfather's things, not as memories, but as assets waiting to be claimed. I didn't have the words for it then. I just felt it, like a draft under a door. I had no power to do anything about it. I was just a kid who liked the smell of cedar and the sound of sandpaper. So I watched. And I waited. My grandfather got sick the spring I turned 20. Slow at first, fatigue, then the diagnosis, then the steady decline that nobody wants to name out loud. Marcus visited more during those months than he had in years. I noticed that too. I overheard him on the phone in the kitchen one evening, voice low, talking to someone about liquidating the property once things settled. Settled. That's the word he used. Like. Our grandfather dying was a transaction waiting to clear. I stood in the hallway and said nothing. I went back to my room and lay there in the dark, turning the word over in my head. Settled. That's the word they use for everything that used to be love. I didn't confront him. I didn't tell my mother. I just started paying attention differently, to documents left open on the counter, to phone calls cut short when I walked in, to the way Marcus started referring to the garage as the asset instead of Grandpa's place. I kept showing up at the garage anyway. I oiled the tools so they wouldn't rust. I swept the floor. I finished sanding the rocking chair my grandfather never got to finish, slow, the way he taught me, so it wouldn't split later. Nobody asked me to do that. Nobody noticed I did. My grandfather passed in October. The funeral was small. Marcus cried in front of everyone and then, 2 days later, asked our mother for the paperwork on the garage. Before the ground had even fully settled over the grave, I realized something in that moment. I was invisible to him. He'd never once asked what I wanted, what I remembered, what that place meant to me. He didn't see me as a threat. I decided, quietly, to let him keep thinking that. Have you ever had to stay silent to protect yourself even when every part of you wanted to speak up? Tell me in the comments. I read them. 6 months after the funeral, I was cleaning. Out a drawer in the garage workbench when I found an envelope taped beneath it, my name written on the front in my grandfather's handwriting. Inside was a key, a business card for an estate attorney named Patricia Voss, and a single line on a note card. You always understood it wasn't about the wood. I sat on that same overturned bucket for a long time before I called her. Patricia explained it plainly, the way good lawyers do. My grandfather had transferred. Out a drawer in the garage workbench when I found an envelope taped beneath it, My name written on the front in my grandfather's handwriting. Inside was a key, a business card for an estate attorney named Patricia Voss, and a single line on a note card. You always understood it wasn't about the wood. I sat on that same overturned bucket for a long time before I called her. Patricia explained it plainly, the way good lawyers do. My grandfather had transferred $1,000 for the lot, planning to close by the end of November. He'd told the buyer it was all but finalized. He'd told my mother the same thing, he just hadn't checked the deed. One night, I heard him on the phone again, this time in the driveway, telling the developer's agent, "We sign Thursday." My brother's not a problem, he won't even read the paperwork. He laughed when he said it. I went inside, sat at my desk, and texted Patricia 2 words. I'm ready. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button because this story is about to turn. That night, Marcus went to sleep thinking he'd won. He had a buyer. He had a date. He had a brother he thought wouldn't even glance at the paperwork. He didn't know I already had. It was 11:50 p.m. when I sat down at my kitchen table with Patricia's documents in front of me. The house was quiet, that same holding your breath quiet from years ago, except now I wasn't afraid of it. Did I read every page twice? Then I signed. 12:03 a.m. I am 28. I am the legal owner of my grandfather's garage, and across town, Marcus was asleep, dreaming about a closing date that no longer meant anything. He'd find that out in about 36 hours. The family gathered 2 days later for my mother's birthday. Marcus pulled me aside near the kitchen, quitclaim papers in hand, and asked me, calm, businesslike, to sign so they could finally close this out. I'll think about it, I said. He looked at me like I was still the person he thought I was. I wasn't. I hadn't been for 6 months. His phone rang an hour later. It was the developer's agent. I watched his face change in real time, confusion, then disbelief, then that pale, quiet stillness I remembered from years before, except this time it was mine to witness, not cause. He didn't yell. He just sat down at the table and said nothing for a long time. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. I just refilled my drink and sat back down across from him, unmoved. My grandfather used to say, "You rush wood and it splits on you later. Looks fine for now. Doesn't hold." I always thought he meant furniture. He meant people. He meant patience. He meant the difference between grabbing something and earning the right to keep it. Marcus sold his half of the inherited savings within a year, chasing the next shortcut. We don't talk much anymore. Patricia still handles the trust paperwork every spring, always with the same line, "Your grandfather would be proud of how quiet you were." As for me, I still have the garage. I refinished that rocking chair completely. It sits by the workbench now, finished, solid, exactly the way he wanted it. Did I think about him every time I run my thumb along the grain of a piece of wood, and I think, some inheritances aren't things. They're the patience to wait for what's already yours. If you've ever had to stay quiet while someone underestimated you, I want to hear your story. Tell me in the comments, and if this story moved you, subscribe. There are more to come.